Welcome back to Sleep Storyteller, where every night is a new adventure, and every story is a journey into the unknown. I'm so glad you're here, ready to relax, unwind, and let the gentle sound of rain guide you into a peaceful slumber. As we begin tonight's story, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the world outside fade away. Remember, this is your space, a place to let go, to dream, and to find the calm you need. If you're ready for tonight's story, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing what helps you relax most at night. Now, let's begin. The Forgotten Dream. The night was deep, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny diamonds upon a velvet cloth, twinkling in a dance that seemed to stretch into eternity. The moon, full and radiant, cast its silvery light over the quiet village nestled at the edge of the whispering woods. A soft breeze stirred the trees, their leaves rustling as though sharing ancient secrets with the night. In a small cottage at the edge of the village, a young woman named Amara lay restless in her bed. The air in the room was cool, the faint scent of lavender and rosemary mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest beyond. Yet, despite the tranquility around her, Amara couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to her like a second skin. She tossed and turned beneath the heavy quilt, her thoughts swirling like a storm. There was something missing. A fragment of a memory, a whisper of a dream that she couldn't quite grasp. It had been haunting her for weeks now, ever since she had first experienced that strange vision in her sleep, a dream that felt more like a memory than a mere fantasy. The dream always began the same way. She was standing at the edge of a vast, endless ocean, the waves crashing violently against the shore. The sky above her was a deep, swirling mass of storm clouds, flickering with occasional flashes of lightning. There was a figure standing in the distance, their face hidden in the shadows. But Amara could feel their presence, pulling her toward them with an undeniable force. She would try to reach them, but each time she moved forward, the distance between them seemed to grow, as if they were slipping further and further away. Then, just as she was about to give up, she would hear a voice, a soft, soothing voice that called her name. It was familiar, comforting even, yet she couldn't place it. Amara. The voice would whisper, echoing in the wind, but always just out of reach. She would try to answer, to call back, but no words would come. The dream would end with her standing alone on the shore, the ocean's waves crashing around her, and the voice fading into nothingness. Each time she woke from the dream, the sensation lingered, a feeling that she had forgotten something important, something she was supposed to remember. But no matter how hard she tried, the details of the dream slipped away like water through her fingers. It was as if the dream itself was being erased from her mind, leaving only the echoes of its absence. Amara sat up in bed, her heart racing, beads of sweat forming on her brow. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to steady her breathing. The dream was more vivid tonight, more real than ever before. She could almost feel the wind against her skin, the salt of the ocean air in her lungs. But the voice, she couldn't recall it. No matter how hard she tried, she closed her eyes, trying to summon the memory. Amara. The voice echoed in her mind, but it was faint, a distant whisper on the edge of her consciousness. She grasped at it desperately, as if by sheer will she could pull it into her waking thoughts, but it eluded her, fading like the remnants of a forgotten melody. With a sigh, Amara swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet brushing against the cold wooden floor. She stood up slowly, her body feeling heavy with the weight of the unanswered questions that seemed to follow her everywhere. What was it about this dream that troubled her so? Why did it feel as though something was being kept from her? She stepped to the window, the soft glow of the moonlight spilling through the panes. The village lay still and quiet beneath the sky, the only sound the rustling of the trees in the distance. Amara gazed out into the night, her eyes scanning the familiar landscape of rolling hills and dense woods. She had always lived here, in this peaceful village, surrounded by the safety of the forest and the comfort of her simple life. But now, with the dream haunting her, she felt as though there was something more, something hidden, just beyond her reach, calling her to find it. Her eyes lingered on the dark silhouette of the whispering woods, the ancient forest that bordered the village. It had always been a place of mystery, its dense trees hiding secrets older than time itself. The villagers spoke of strange happenings in the woods, of travelers who disappeared without a trace, of voices that could be heard in the wind, whispering in languages no one understood. Some believed the forest was alive, that it had a consciousness of its own, watching over the village and its inhabitants. Amara had never given much thought to those stories, dismissing them as superstition. But now, with the dream lingering in her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more truth to them than she had ever realized. Perhaps the forest held the answers she was searching for, the key to unlocking the mystery of her dreams. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thought. She had always been a practical person, grounded in reality. But the pull of the dream, the sense that something was missing, was too strong to ignore. Without thinking, she grabbed her cloak from the hook by the door and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her heart was racing, but her mind was set. She couldn't stay in this room, haunted by the dream and the sense of something forgotten. She needed answers, answers that could only be found in the woods. Amara stepped out into the cool night air, the familiar scent of pine and earth filling her lungs. The village was silent around her, the houses dark and still as everyone else slept. She moved quietly, her footsteps soft on the earth as she made her way toward the edge of the village, where the trees of the whispering woods began to loom. The forest was waiting for her, and deep within its shadowed depths, she felt a presence, a whisper in the wind, a call she couldn't resist. The voice from her dreams, the one that had been just out of reach, seemed to echo faintly in the distance, Amara. It called again, and for the first time, she felt as if the dream and reality were beginning to blur, pulling her toward something unknown but undeniable. Amara moved swiftly through the quiet village, her cloak billowing softly in the midnight breeze, her footsteps quiet against the cobblestone streets. The familiar sight of the village, bathed in the silver glow of the moon, seemed distant now, as if she were already slipping away from everything she had known. Each step toward the whispering woods felt like a step toward something that had always been waiting for her, something she had yet to understand, but that had always been a part of her, a forgotten thread that had been pulled loose from the weave of her life. As she approached the edge of the village, the sounds of the night began to shift. The quiet murmur of distant crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. The forest loomed before her, dark and enigmatic, its towering trees casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the very heart of the earth. The air around the woods felt charged, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Amara hesitated for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. She had grown up in this village, spent her days wandering these streets, but the forest had always been off-limits, untouched, unexplored. Her grandmother had often warned her about the dangers of the whispering woods, tales of creatures that lurked in the dark, of paths that led nowhere, of travelers who never returned, but none of those stories seemed to matter now. The pull of the dream was too strong, the sense of something forgotten too urgent. She had to find what lay within the forest, had to uncover the truth behind the voice that called to her. The voice she could never quite remember, but that felt so familiar, as if it was a part of her own soul. With a deep breath, Amara stepped into the woods. The moment her foot touched the soft earth beneath the trees, the air seemed to shift. It was cooler here, the shadows deeper, but there was something else, something she couldn't explain. The silence was almost palpable, the kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. She walked slowly, carefully, her senses heightened. Every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig beneath her boot, seemed to reverberate through the trees. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, watching her, listening to her every movement. Yet there was no sound of animals, no sign of life, just the weight of the silence. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she moved deeper into the woods. She could feel the presence of something, though she couldn't name it. The feeling was both comforting and unsettling, as if the forest was offering her protection and yet keeping her on the edge of something she didn't fully understand. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the stillness, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Amara. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was unmistakable now, clear and distinct in the still night air. It was the same voice from her dream, the one that had called her name, and this time. She could almost feel it, like a tangible presence just beyond the veil of her consciousness. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, as if the forest itself was responding to her question, a soft glow began to appear ahead of her, faint at first, like the distant flicker of a lantern in the dark. Amara hesitated, unsure of whether she should follow it or turn back. But the voice had called her, and the glow seemed to be leading her, guiding her deeper into the heart of the forest. With renewed resolve, she followed the light, her feet moving silently over the moss-covered ground. The glow grew brighter as she moved closer, until it illuminated a small clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, partially covered in vines and moss, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The stone was smooth and polished, its surface etched with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint energy, as if the markings themselves were alive. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this structure before, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had always been here, waiting for her. The moment she stepped into the clearing, the voice spoke again, this time more clearly, more urgently. "Come closer, Amara." It was not a command, but an invitation, gentle yet insistent. As if the voice itself was beckoning her forward, urging her to uncover what had been hidden for so long. With a mixture of hesitation and determination, Amara approached the stone structure, her eyes scanning the symbols etched into its surface. They were intricate and complex, twisting patterns that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them, as if the stone itself were alive, responding to her presence. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as they hovered just above the stone. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, so intense that it took her breath away. The symbols on the stone began to glow, their light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. And for a moment, Amara felt as though she was connected to something far greater than herself, something ancient and powerful. Then, the voice spoke again, this time with a sense of urgency that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have come for what was forgotten, Amara. But you must be ready, for the truth you seek will change everything." Amara's heart raced. The words sent a ripple of fear and anticipation through her, but she couldn't stop now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. "I'm ready," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she truly was. The stone beneath her hand pulsed once more, and then, with a sound like the cracking of ancient stone, it began to shift. A hidden door slid open, revealing a dark passageway leading deep into the earth. The glow from the stone above illuminated the way forward, but Amara hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the darkness. The voice followed her, echoing softly in her mind. "You are not alone, Amara. The past is waiting for you. Remember who you are." And with that, she descended into the depths, her footsteps soft on the stone as the forest closed behind her. The darkness inside the passageway swallowed Amara whole, the glow from the stone above dimming as she descended further into the earth. The air was thick and musty, a damp chill creeping into her bones, but she hardly noticed it. Her heart was beating loudly in her chest, drowning out the sounds of her steps. She could still hear the voice, now soft and almost comforting, echoing in her mind, guiding her deeper into the unknown. "Remember who you are, Amara." The words repeated themselves, and with each repetition, the weight of their meaning grew heavier. What did it all mean? She had never felt connected to anything beyond her simple life in the village. She had always been content there, her days filled with work and quiet moments, her nights spent with the warmth of the hearth. But now she was descending into a forgotten world, one that called to her in whispers and dreams. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, the stone walls closing in around her with each step. Yet, just as she began to feel the weight of the darkness press against her, the passage opened up into a vast cavern. She stepped into the wide space, her eyes squinting as the light from the glowing stone above illuminated the cavern's interior. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The cavern stretched out before her, its ceiling so high that it seemed to disappear into the darkness. The walls were lined with glittering crystals, their surfaces shimmering in the soft light. They pulsed with a faint energy, casting strange shadows that danced across the floor. The air here felt different, alive with a kind of ancient magic that hummed just beneath the surface. As though the cavern itself was aware of her presence, at the far end of the cavern, a large altar stood, draped in vines and moss, the stone worn smooth with age. The altar was surrounded by a circle of stones, each one inscribed with similar symbols to those on the stone she had touched earlier. It was as if the cavern itself was a sanctuary, a place where time had no meaning, where the very fabric of the world had been woven together in some long-forgotten ritual. Amara's feet carried her toward the altar, though her mind felt distant, as though it was no longer in control of her movements. She felt drawn to the altar, as if something deep within her was calling her forward. As she stepped closer, the voice spoke again, its tone more urgent now, its presence filling her mind. "It is time, Amara. The truth is within your reach." She could feel the words reverberating through her, filling her with a sense of purpose she had never known before. The pull of the altar was irresistible now, and she stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward it. The moment her fingers brushed against the cool surface of the stone, a shock of energy coursed through her, almost knocking her back. She gasped, her breath coming in sharp, shallow breaths as the cavern seemed to come alive around her. The crystals on the walls flickered, their light intensifying, and the symbols on the altar began to glow with a blinding brilliance. Amara's eyes widened in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, she could see it, a vision, a flash of something ancient and powerful. She was standing in the middle of a vast city, its buildings towering above her, their structures carved from the same glowing stone that now surrounded her. The streets were bustling with life, people moving about, their faces strange and unfamiliar. But it wasn't the city that caught her attention. It was the sky. The sky was alive, swirling with vibrant colors, shifting and changing like a living thing. The stars above were unlike any she had ever seen, their shapes and patterns unfamiliar, yet somehow deeply comforting. Then, the vision shifted. She was standing in a temple, similar to the one before her now, but this one was grander, its walls covered in intricate carvings, its air thick with the scent of incense and ancient power. At the center of the temple stood a figure, tall and regal, their face hidden in the shadows. The figure turned toward her, and as they did, a wave of recognition washed over Amara. She knew this figure. It was as though she had known them her entire life, though she had never seen them before. The connection between them was undeniable, but before she could take another step, the vision shattered, the images fracturing and dissolving like fragments of a dream slipping away with the dawn. Amara was left standing in the cavern, breathless and shaken, her heart racing with the intensity of the experience. For a long moment, she stood there, staring at the altar, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. The vision had been so vivid, so real, yet it felt as though it had come from a time long past, a world that had been lost to the ages. But there was no time to dwell on the meaning of the vision. She knew that whatever lay ahead, she had to keep moving forward. The truth was within her reach. With a steadying breath, Amara stepped back from the altar, her eyes scanning the cavern once more. The voice spoke again, softer now, as if it had been waiting for her to understand. "The past is never truly forgotten, Amara. It lives within you, in the very marrow of your bones. You must remember." And just as the words faded, a new sound filled the cavern, a low hum, almost like the beat of a distant drum. Amara's gaze snapped to the source of the sound, and her heart skipped a beat. At the farthest point of the cavern, a door had appeared, seemingly out of thin air. It was made of the same glowing stone, the surface covered in similar symbols to those she had seen before. The door was pulsating with energy, as if it was waiting for her. She felt the pull of it immediately, an undeniable force that seemed to resonate within her very core. Without a moment's hesitation, she moved toward the door, her hand reaching out to touch it. As her fingers brushed the surface, the door opened slowly, revealing a passage that led further into the heart of the earth, and with that, Amara stepped forward, leaving behind the cavern and everything she had known, venturing deeper into the forgotten world that was calling her home, Amara stepped through the glowing door. The passage ahead beckoning her with an energy she could almost taste. The air felt thicker now, laden with an unspoken promise, as if every moment was carrying her closer to something monumental, something long buried and waiting to be uncovered. Her fingers still tingled from the touch of the stone, the sensation lingering as if the door itself had left an imprint on her soul. The cavern behind her seemed to close, the sounds of the hum fading into a distant memory as the door sealed itself quietly behind her. She was now in a narrow, winding corridor, its walls smooth and cool to the touch, the stone beneath her feet firm and unyielding. The passage seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting in ways that made her lose track of time and direction. The air was still, save for a faint breeze that stirred from somewhere ahead, carrying with it the scent of earth and ancient things. She had no idea how far beneath the surface she was, but the feeling of being deep within the earth did not disturb her. Instead, it felt strangely comforting, as if the earth was embracing her, guiding her forward. With every step, the pulse of the stone grew stronger, almost as if the very walls of the corridor were alive, reacting to her presence. The symbols she had seen earlier on the altar began to appear again, etched into the walls of the tunnel, faintly glowing with the same soft light that had illuminated the cavern. It was as though the path she was walking was somehow woven with magic, a thread of power that stretched through the ages, connecting her to a time and place long forgotten. Amara's thoughts kept drifting back to the vision she had seen in the cavern. The city, the temple, the mysterious figure that had turned toward her, these images lingered in her mind. Each one like a half-formed memory, elusive yet tantalizing. She could almost hear the faint echo of a voice, the same voice that had guided her from the moment the dream had first begun. "Remember who you are." The words hung in the air, a constant refrain that seemed to wrap around her like an invisible thread. She couldn't escape them, nor did she want to. The voice was not a command, it was a gentle reminder, a call to something deep within her, something she had forgotten but now seemed destined to remember. The voice was familiar, almost as if it had always been with her, waiting patiently for her to listen. The tunnel ahead grew darker as the light from the glowing symbols faded. And yet the path before her was clear. The soft hum from the walls seemed to intensify, the energy building in a way that made her skin prickle with anticipation. Something was approaching, something ancient and powerful. As she moved forward, a distant light appeared ahead, faint at first, but growing brighter with each step. It beckoned her, a beacon in the darkness. She quickened her pace, drawn toward it, feeling a strange sense of urgency as though the light held the answers she had been searching for. The passage seemed to open up, widening as she drew closer, revealing the source of the light. Ahead, at the end of the passage, stood a door, massive and ornate, crafted from the same glowing stone as the walls of the tunnel. This door, however, was different. It was not simply a doorway to another space, it was a threshold, a boundary that separated one world from another. The door was carved with intricate patterns, symbols that seemed to shift and change as she approached, their meaning slipping just out of her grasp. There was a feeling in the air now, a thick, palpable sense of power that made her heart race. Amara reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the cool stone. The moment her fingers made contact, the door responded. A deep rumble reverberated through the air, and the symbols on the door flared to life, glowing brighter than before. Slowly, the door began to open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was unlike anything Amara had ever seen. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents stretching up to the high, vaulted ceiling. The shelves were filled with ancient tomes, scrolls, and artifacts that seemed to hum with a quiet power, as though each item held a piece of forgotten knowledge. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and the faintest trace of incense. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where time had been suspended, waiting for someone to rediscover it. At the center of the room, a large stone pedestal stood, and atop it rested a single object, a book. The book was old, its leather cover cracked and worn with age, but it radiated a quiet, unshakable power. The book seemed to glow faintly, its pages undisturbed by the passage of time. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat as she approached it, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was what she had been seeking, what had called her here. The book was not just a relic, it was a key, a gateway to something far greater than she could comprehend. The voice echoed in her mind once more, clearer now, its tone almost reverent. The answers you seek lie within this book. But remember, Amara, knowledge comes at a price. Her fingers hovered over the book, the weight of its presence heavy in the air. She knew, deep in her bones, that once she opened it, nothing would ever be the same. The truth, whatever it was, would change everything. But she could no longer deny it. The pull was too strong, the need to understand too great. With a steadying breath, Amara reached for the book, her fingers brushing the cover. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy coursed through her, filling her with a sense of purpose and connection that took her breath away. The room seemed to pulse around her, the shelves, the books, and the artifacts all vibrating with a life of their own. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her, as though the very fabric of time was unraveling before her. The book opened slowly in her hands, its pages turning on their own, revealing ancient text written in a language she didn't understand. But as she stared at the words, they began to shift, to form something she could comprehend. The symbols danced before her eyes, their meaning coming to life in her mind. This is your past, Amara. Your true self. The words echoed in her thoughts, and she knew, without a doubt, that what lay before her was not just a history, it was her own. The forgotten pieces of her life, her legacy, her true purpose, were here, waiting for her to remember, and as she turned the first page, she stepped further into the unknown, ready to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Amara stood in the midst of the vast chamber, the open book cradled gently in her hands. The pages, though ancient, seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if each word was alive, waiting for her to read it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page, drawn into the mysteries it held. The words shifted before her eyes, weaving themselves into coherent thoughts that wrapped around her like a cloak. At first, the language seemed foreign, strange symbols and markings that made her head spin. But then, as if by instinct, the symbols began to fall into place, the meaning clear and undeniable. The serpent's heart is your birthright, Amara. It has always been with you, waiting to awaken. The words reverberated in her mind, filling her chest with a warmth that was both comforting and unsettling. The serpent's heart. She had heard that phrase before, whispers in the back of her mind, in the stories her grandmother had once told her. But what did it truly mean? The images came to her in a sudden rush. A vast, golden serpent coiling around a mountain, its eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom. A temple hidden deep in the forest, its entrance guarded by massive stone serpents. And in the center of it all, a figure, her, standing before the serpent, the heart of the serpent pulsing with energy in her chest. She gasped, stepping back from the book as a wave of dizziness swept over her. Was this a vision of her past? Or was it a glimpse of what was to come? She felt as if she had been transported to another time. To a place she had never known yet recognized in her bones. The serpent, the heart, it all seemed so distant and yet so deeply familiar. The voice spoke again, now softer, as if it were guiding her, urging her to listen closely. The heart calls to you, Amara. It has been waiting, hidden within your soul. It is the key to your destiny, to the secrets of your true nature. Her pulse quickened. The heart, the serpent, it all seemed to be pointing towards something, something that had been hidden from her for as long as she could remember. She had always known there was more to her life than the quiet village she had grown up in, more than the simple existence she had lived. Now, standing in this chamber, the weight of that truth settled on her shoulders like a cloak she could not shrug off. The pages of the book fluttered in her hands, turning on their own, as if the story were unfolding before her, revealing what she needed to see. Amara's eyes moved across the words, and she saw it, the story of the serpent's heart. Long ago, the serpent had been a protector, a guardian of an ancient civilization that had thrived in harmony with nature. Its heart, a jewel of unimaginable power, had been entrusted to a chosen one, someone who would carry the legacy of the serpent and use its power to protect the world. But over time, the serpent's people had vanished. Their civilization lost to the sands of time. The heart had been hidden, waiting for the one who would come to claim it, and now, the heart was calling to her. The realization settled heavily in Amara's chest. She was the one. She was the chosen one. The serpent's blood ran through her veins, its power sleeping within her, waiting to be awakened. It was a truth that both terrified and exhilarated her, a responsibility that she had never asked for but could not deny. She was part of something ancient, something vast. And the world, it seemed, was waiting for her to embrace it. Her hands shook as she turned another page, and this time, the words were different. They were no longer written in the language of the ancients, but in her own, as if the book itself had become attuned to her thoughts. The words filled her mind with a vision, one that was so vivid she could almost feel it. She saw herself standing in the center of a vast desert, the sun blazing down upon her. In the distance, a mountain rose like a giant, its peak lost in the clouds. The serpent coiled around it, its golden scales glittering in the sunlight, its eyes locked on her. The heart, a glowing jewel at the center of the serpent's chest, pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beat of her own heart, and then, the serpent spoke, "You are the one who will awaken the heart, Amara. Only you can unlock its true power. But the path is not easy. It is fraught with danger, and the heart can only be claimed by one who is willing to sacrifice everything." The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Amara breathless, her chest tight with the weight of what she had seen. Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? What could she lose? She turned another page, her eyes scanning the words, but they were no longer the answers she sought. They were warnings, warnings of the trials that lay ahead. The path to the heart would not be an easy one. It was fraught with danger, and there would be enemies, those who sought the heart for themselves, those who would stop at nothing to claim its power. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Amara's shoulders. She could feel the weight of it, the gravity of the choice she now faced. She had been brought here for a reason, but that reason had come with a price. The world was asking something of her, something she could not ignore. As the last page turned, Amara closed the book, the words now etched into her mind. She knew what she had to do. The serpent's heart was hers to claim, and the power it held was hers to wield. But the cost, what would she have to give up to awaken the heart? And would she be ready to face the consequences of her choice? She didn't know the answers to those questions yet, but she knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. The past had called to her. And now it was time to embrace her destiny. With a deep breath, Amara stepped away from the pedestal, the book still in her hands. The chamber seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching as the light from the book dimmed. The air was thick with anticipation, and she could feel the weight of the journey ahead pressing down on her. But she could not hesitate. She had come too far. The serpent's heart was waiting for her, and she would face whatever trials lay ahead, no matter the cost. Amara stood in the shadow of the chamber, her fingers still clutching the ancient book. It felt heavier now, its weight pressing into her palms as if it too understood the enormity of what lay ahead. Her thoughts raced, the words from the book echoing in her mind, each one a puzzle piece she wasn't sure how to fit together. Sacrifice. The word lingered like smoke in the air, curling into the corners of her thoughts. What would it mean? What did the heart require from her? And what of the enemies, those who sought the heart for their own gain? The road before her was far from clear, but she had no choice but to walk it. With a deep breath, she turned toward the door she had entered through. The same stone that had sealed behind her. But now, as she stepped closer, it was no longer there. The door was gone, leaving only the dim glow of the symbols on the walls, casting shadows across the floor. The passageway, the labyrinthine corridors that had led her to this place, were now hidden from view, leaving her with only the open room and the echo of her own breath. For a moment, she stood still, her heart thudding in her chest. She had no map, no guide. The book was no longer providing answers, it had shown her only glimpses of the path, the barest hints of what awaited. The serpent, the heart, the trials, they were hers to discover now. But how? Where would she go? The air seemed to shift. A subtle change, as though the chamber itself was aware of her uncertainty. The walls hummed softly, a deep, resonating tone that vibrated through her body, urging her forward. It was as if the place had its own will, its own purpose, and it was calling to her. Amara glanced back at the pedestal where the book had rested. The light from its pages had faded, leaving the room bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow, but something had changed. The pedestal now stood empty, as if the book itself had dissolved into the ether, its presence leaving behind only the lingering sense of ancient power. The energy in the room was palpable, thick and ancient, pressing down on her with the weight of millennia. The serpent's heart was still out there, somewhere. But where? She had no clear sense of direction, only the weight of the knowledge in her hands and the ever-present pull of the unseen force that guided her. It was then that she noticed the subtle shift in the room. The floor, which had seemed unremarkable, now gleamed with a faint outline. The symbols on the walls flickered slightly, and as Amara took a tentative step toward the center of the room, the floor beneath her feet began to glow, the lines shifting to form a path. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat as the floor continued to pulse with light. The faint hum of the room grew louder, filling her ears with a rhythmic beat that resonated in her chest. The path on the floor was now clearly visible, etched into the stone in brilliant, golden light. It stretched out before her, disappearing into the shadows at the far end of the chamber, but she could feel it calling to her. Without hesitation, Amara began to walk. The path beneath her feet shifted with each step, the light underfoot flickering in time with her movements. The air seemed to become thicker, the shadows deepening, as if the very space around her was warping, bending to the path she was on. She could feel the presence of something ancient, watching her, guiding her. It was as though the room itself were alive, responding to her every thought, every action. The symbols on the walls now seemed to shift and change with her movements, their meanings shifting as though they were speaking directly to her. They whispered in a language she couldn't fully comprehend, but the meaning was clear enough: you are not alone. The heart watches you. The path before her narrowed, the light becoming dimmer, until the glow was reduced to a faint shimmer. She could hear the soft sound of her own breath, her footsteps echoing in the silence. It was as though the air itself had grown still, holding its breath along with her. She was being led somewhere, but where? And why? As the path came to a sudden end, Amara found herself standing in front of a massive, intricately carved door. Unlike the one she had passed through before, this one seemed alive, its surface rippling with an iridescent sheen, the markings shifting constantly, as though the door were watching her. The serpent's eyes. The thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. She had seen them before, in the visions, in the dreams. The serpent's eyes glowed with an ancient wisdom, watching her as though it knew her every move, every thought. And now, the door seemed to be doing the same. Amara reached out, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the door. The moment her skin made contact, the room around her seemed to shudder, the energy in the air pulsing with renewed intensity. The symbols on the door flickered and spun, the markings shifting as if they were rearranging themselves, revealing a new message: only the chosen may pass. But to enter, you must be willing to face the truth of what you are. The words struck her like a hammer. Face the truth of what she was. What did that mean? She had come this far, followed the path laid out before her, but now she was being asked to confront something deep inside her. Her heart raced, but she did not pull away. She had come too far to turn back now. The serpent, the heart, it was all tied to her, and if she was to unlock the power that awaited her, she needed to embrace whatever the door was asking of her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and pushed the door open. The moment she did, a rush of wind filled the room, swirling around her in a vortex of energy. The symbols on the door flared brightly, then faded away as the door swung wide, revealing a vast chamber beyond. But it was not a chamber she had expected. The space was filled with mirrors, hundreds of them, stretching from floor to ceiling, each one reflecting a different version of herself. Some of the mirrors showed her as she was now, but others were distorted, twisted, showing her in ways she could not comprehend. In one, she saw herself standing on a cliff, the wind whipping through her hair as she gazed out over an endless sea. In another, she was surrounded by flames, her hands glowing with fire. And in yet another, she stood alone in a dark, desolate landscape, a figure with no face. Amara stepped into the room, her breath catching in her throat. Each mirror seemed to hold a truth, a part of herself she had never fully seen or understood. She had thought she knew who she was, but now, standing in front of these reflections, she realized how little she truly understood about herself. The wind in the chamber began to howl, and Amara turned to see the source, a figure standing at the far end of the room, cloaked in shadow. Their presence felt familiar, but she could not place it. The figure raised a hand, and the mirrors began to shift, rearranging themselves, revealing yet another version of her. One that she did not recognize. One that was darker, colder. The voice from before echoed in her mind, "Face the truth, Amara. Who are you truly?" She stepped forward, the weight of the question settling deep within her. The answer was hidden in the mirrors, in the reflections of herself she had yet to understand. And only by facing them would she be able to continue her journey, and unlock the heart. Amara stood in the center of the mirror-filled chamber, her gaze drifting from one reflection to the next. The air felt thick with the weight of her uncertainty, each mirror revealing a piece of herself she had never fully acknowledged. The figure cloaked in shadow at the far end of the room seemed to be waiting for her, its presence almost suffocating in the stillness. It watched her, a silent observer, urging her to move forward. Each reflection that met her eyes was a version of herself, yet not the one she knew. There was the version standing tall, bathed in a golden light, eyes filled with confidence and power. In another, she appeared fragile, lost, eyes dimmed with sadness. In yet another, she was a warrior, surrounded by flames, her hands raised as if ready to battle the very elements themselves. But the one that caught her attention the most was a figure standing at the edge of a dark forest, its back turned, its silhouette framed by an eerie, moonlit glow. There was something hauntingly familiar about it, a sense that this was a version of her that she had once known but forgotten. A part of herself she had buried deep within. The whispers of the chamber filled her ears again, the soft, melodic hum now intertwining with the voice that had spoken before. "Who are you truly, Amara?" The words echoed, repeating over and over again, the question pressing into her mind with increasing urgency. She hesitated. Who was she truly? She had always thought she knew who she was, a daughter, a granddaughter, a simple villager with a life full of quiet routines. But now, standing in this room of mirrors, she realized how little she had understood of her true nature. The serpent, the heart, it was all connected to her in ways she hadn't yet fully grasped. But the answers were here, hidden within the reflections. If she could only face them. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward one of the mirrors, her reflection warping as her hand drew closer. The golden version of herself in the mirror seemed to smile, its eyes radiating a calm confidence that she had never known. The woman in the mirror was everything Amara had longed to be, strong, assured, fearless. But as she touched the glass, the smile faded, replaced by an expression of sorrow, as if the mirror knew that Amara was not yet ready to claim that power. The wind in the room picked up again, swirling around her, pushing her toward the next reflection, the one that showed her as fragile, lost, eyes dimmed with despair. This reflection was the one she had feared most. It was the version of herself she had been for so many years, lost in the shadows of her own uncertainty, unsure of who she was or where she belonged. A deep sadness settled in her chest as she stared at the reflection. Was this who she truly was? A broken soul, hiding from the world, too afraid to face the truth of her own power. The voice in the room shifted, becoming softer, almost sympathetic. This is the part of you that fears the heart, Amara. The part that is afraid of your own strength, of what you might become. Amara recoiled slightly from the reflection, her heart racing. She had been afraid, hadn't she? Afraid of the power within her. Of what it could mean for the world and for herself. She had spent so long hiding from it, running from the truth of who she was, believing that she was nothing more than a simple girl from a small village. But the heart, the serpent, it had been calling to her for a reason. She was meant for something greater, something beyond what she had ever imagined. She turned away from the fragile reflection, her resolve hardening. I am not this, she whispered to herself. I am not afraid anymore. Her eyes moved across the room, seeking another reflection. And there, in the far corner of the room, she saw it. The version of herself standing at the edge of the dark forest, its back turned. The moonlight glinted off its figure, casting a long, eerie shadow on the ground. It was distant, almost unreachable, as if the version of herself in this mirror had already embraced the unknown, had already made the choice to face the darkness. Amara's breath caught in her throat. This was the reflection she had been avoiding, the one she could not bring herself to face. It was the woman who had chosen the path of the serpent, who had chosen to accept the heart's power, no matter the cost. This is the truth of who you are, the voice spoke again, its tone both gentle and commanding. The heart is within you. It is not something you seek, it is something you must awaken. The words settled over Amara like a blanket, wrapping her in their truth. The serpent, the heart, the power that was hidden inside her, it was not something she could run from anymore. It was part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. She had known it all along, but now, she was ready to face it. Stepping closer to the mirror, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool surface. As she did, the reflection shifted, the figure turning slowly to face her. It was her, but it wasn't. Her eyes, those familiar eyes, glowed with an intensity that was both unsettling and mesmerizing. And there, at the center of her chest, was the faint outline of the heart, glowing softly in the darkness. Amara gasped, her hand trembling as she pressed it against the mirror. The reflection mirrored her movements, its eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. You are ready, the voice said, its presence now strong and clear. To awaken the heart, you must first awaken yourself. The mirror rippled, the surface warping as if it were made of water, and then, in an instant, it shattered. The shards flew out in every direction, but instead of cutting her, they dissolved into the air, leaving behind nothing but silence. For a long moment, Amara stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. The chamber around her had returned to its stillness, the mirrors now gone, their reflections no longer clouding her vision. She was alone, but she didn't feel lost. For the first time, she felt as though she knew what she had to do. The serpent, the heart, it was waiting for her. And now, she was ready to claim it. Amara stood in the center of the chamber, her body humming with the energy of the mirror's disappearance. The air around her was still, but a deep, resonating thrum seemed to pulse beneath the silence. It was the heart, calling her forward, urging her to take the next step, to embrace what she had discovered in the broken shards of her reflections. Her hand still tingled where it had touched the mirror, the sensation lingering like the memory of a dream she could not fully grasp. The pieces of herself, scattered before her, had come together. But the path was far from clear. She had faced the darkness of her own fears, and now, the weight of what was to come felt both overwhelming and inevitable. The door that had opened before her had closed quietly, sealing her in this room of forgotten truths. There was no turning back now. The serpent, the heart, they awaited her, and whatever trials lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face them. The question was no longer whether she was strong enough, but whether she was willing to embrace the power that was now hers for the taking. The whispers from the shadows echoed in her mind once more, but they were no longer a haunting presence. Instead, they felt like a call, faint, but growing louder. Urging her to move forward. The heart is within you, Amara. Claim it. A deep breath escaped her lips, her chest rising with the weight of the words. The familiar voice, once distant and foreboding, now felt like a companion, one who had always been by her side, guiding her, even when she hadn't understood. With each step she took, the room seemed to shift around her. The floor, once solid and unyielding, now pulsed with an ethereal light, guiding her to a new destination. The air grew warmer, as though the space itself was coming alive, responding to her presence, her determination. The walls, once so cold and indifferent, now seemed to lean in toward her, as if they too were watching. Waiting for what would happen next. As Amara moved toward the center of the room, the floor beneath her feet gave way, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into the depths of the earth. The air grew thicker, more charged with energy as she descended. The light from above faded, replaced by the soft glow of phosphorescent moss that clung to the walls, casting eerie shadows along the narrow steps. With every step, she felt herself sinking deeper into the unknown. She didn't know what awaited her below, but she could sense it, an undeniable pull, a force that seemed to draw her in with each breath. It was as though the heart itself was calling her, leading her down a path she had no choice but to follow. The staircase spiraled lower, and with it, her thoughts began to unravel. Memories, once buried deep in her mind, resurfaced. Faces she had forgotten, places she had never visited, all rushed back to her in a chaotic flood. There were fleeting glimpses of her childhood, of her family, of moments long past. But in the midst of it all, one memory stood out, a vision of the serpent, coiled and massive, its scales glistening in the moonlight. Its eyes, ancient and wise, gazed at her as though it had known her forever. The vision of the serpent had come to her in her dreams, in flashes of shadow and light, but now it was clearer, more vivid, as though the creature had always been a part of her. As she descended further, the vision of the serpent grew stronger, its presence filling the air around her. She could hear its voice now, a soft whisper in her mind, guiding her steps. You are not alone, Amara. The heart is within you. Trust in yourself. The words wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, pushing away the lingering doubts that still clung to her thoughts. She had faced the darkness of her own fears, and now, as the path grew darker, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The serpent had always been a symbol of power, wisdom, and transformation. And now, it seemed, it was time for her to transform as well. At last, the staircase ended, and Amara found herself standing in a vast cavern. Its size unimaginable. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, like the surface of a forgotten world. The light from above had long since faded, and she was left standing in the dark, save for the faint glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. In the center of the cavern stood a pedestal, ancient and worn, with strange symbols carved into its surface. It was the only thing in the cavern, the only source of light in this vast, oppressive darkness. And atop the pedestal, bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow, lay the heart. The heart was a stone, but not just any stone. It was a gem, its surface smooth and translucent, swirling with colors that seemed to shift with every movement of the light. It was as if the stone contained the very essence of the world itself, its power, its magic, its life force. Amara could feel the pull of it, the gravity of its presence. It was the source of everything, the heart of the world, and it was waiting for her. As she stepped forward, her heart racing, the ground beneath her seemed to shift, the cavern shifting with her movements. The walls pulsed with energy, the symbols on the pedestal glowing brighter with each step she took. The cavern seemed to hold its breath, watching her every move. When she reached the pedestal, the heart glowed brighter still, its light filling the cavern with a soft, radiant warmth. Amara's hand trembled as she reached out toward the stone, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. The moment her skin touched the heart, a surge of energy erupted from the stone, filling her body with warmth and power. Visions flooded her mind, visions of the serpent, of ancient forests, of dark skies filled with swirling stars. She saw herself, standing at the edge of a great cliff, looking out over a vast sea of stars. The heart was pulsing in her chest, and she could feel its power surging through her veins. In that moment, she understood. The heart was not just a source of power, it was a part of her. It had always been within her, waiting to be awakened. The serpent, the trials, the mirrors, it had all been leading her here, to this moment, when she would finally claim her destiny. With a deep breath, Amara closed her eyes, embracing the surge of energy within her. The heart was hers now, and with it, she was ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. The cavern seemed to fade away as the energy of the heart filled her, and in its light, Amara found her true self, stronger than she had ever been. The serpent had led her here, and now, with the heart within her, she was ready to face the world. Amara stood at the center of the cavern, her breath slow and deep, the rhythm of her heart in sync with the pulsing of the heart in her hands. The stone felt alive, humming with an energy that coursed through her very veins. It was as though the world itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. The power she had long sought was now hers, and yet, with it came a sense of both exhilaration and unease. She could feel the weight of the heart in her grasp, its surface cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. The moment she had touched it, the flood of visions had overwhelmed her, images of distant lands, of forgotten times, of herself in forms she could barely comprehend. But it was more than that. She could hear the whispers of the serpent, distant yet familiar, guiding her towards something beyond this moment, something vast. Something unknown. The cavern, once still and silent, now seemed to hum with life. The symbols on the pedestal glowed brightly, their ancient markings shifting, coming alive in response to her touch. The walls pulsed with energy, the once dark and oppressive air now filled with a warmth that seemed to carry a message, one she couldn't quite decipher, but one she felt deep in her bones. "You have come far, Amara," the voice whispered, the serpent's voice now more present than ever. It was not spoken aloud, but inside her mind, in the quiet corners of her thoughts. "The heart is yours, but it is not the end. It is only the beginning." Her gaze lifted, her eyes searching the cavern, now more attuned to the strange light that danced around her. The once still air now felt charged, the ground beneath her feet vibrating slightly, as though the very earth was waking. She could sense it, something ancient, something powerful, something waiting for her to act. The serpent's voice echoed in her mind once again, though this time, there was an urgency to it. "You must move. There is no time to waste." Amara's fingers tightened around the heart, and the warmth inside her intensified. The cavern seemed to stretch outward, the walls disappearing into the distance. The once isolated space now felt vast, as if the ground beneath her feet were shifting, creating new pathways in the darkness. The heart in her hands pulsed brighter with each passing moment, its glow illuminating the way forward. She took a step, and the cavern shifted. The air grew cooler, the ground beneath her feet harder, as if the very essence of the place had changed in response to her decision. The symbols on the walls flickered and shifted, their meaning indecipherable yet somehow familiar, as though they were calling to her, urging her to follow their lead. With a deep breath, Amara began to walk, the heart in her hands guiding her through the ever-changing landscape of the cavern. The ground seemed to rise and fall, the walls stretching outward and then narrowing, the paths opening and closing with each step she took. It was as if the cavern itself was alive, testing her, watching her, making her prove her worth as she moved deeper into the unknown. As she walked, the visions began to return, fragments of memories, of places and people long forgotten. Faces flashed before her eyes, her family, her friends, people from her past who had played roles she could no longer fully recall. But among these memories, there was one face that stood out, a face she had seen only in fleeting glimpses, a man with eyes that shone like the stars, a man whose presence seemed to haunt her even in her dreams. The serpent's voice echoed again, soft and steady, guiding her forward. "He is waiting for you. The one you seek. The one who holds the key to your destiny." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The man. She had seen him before, in flashes of memory, in dreams, and now she could feel his presence pulling at her, beckoning her toward the unknown. But who was he? And what was his connection to the heart, to the serpent, to everything that had brought her here? The cavern around her seemed to grow darker as she moved deeper, the light from the heart illuminating only the path ahead. The walls were covered in symbols now, each one more intricate than the last, as if they were telling a story that had been waiting for her to unravel. With each step, the air grew colder, and the silence of the cavern became oppressive. It was as if the very stones of the cavern were closing in on her, testing her resolve, pushing her further into the depths. The heartbeat of the heart in her hands grew louder, faster, as if it were guiding her, urging her forward, and the serpent's whispers grew more insistent. "Do not falter, it said, its voice carrying a weight of authority. The heart has chosen you. You must follow its path, no matter where it leads. Amara's grip on the heart tightened as she walked, the weight of her newfound responsibility settling upon her like a cloak. She had come so far, and yet the journey ahead felt endless. The path was unclear, and the shadows of the cavern seemed to shift and twist, making her doubt her every step. But she pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that she could not fully explain. The air grew colder still, and soon, the walls around her seemed to dissolve, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. In the distance, she could make out a faint glow, the same soft, radiant light that had once surrounded the heart. It was drawing her in, and she followed it without hesitation, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The glow grew brighter as she neared, and soon, she found herself standing before a massive door, its surface covered in the same intricate symbols that had adorned the walls. The door seemed to pulse with the same energy as the heart, as if it were waiting for her to unlock its secrets. Amara stood before it, her heart pounding in her chest. The serpent's voice echoed in her mind once more. This is your final test. The door leads to the truth you seek, but you must decide. Will you open it? The decision weighed heavily upon her. What lay beyond the door? What would she find when she crossed its threshold? But deep inside, she knew there was no turning back. She had already come too far. The door was waiting, and the only choice was to open it. With a deep breath, Amara stepped forward, her hand outstretched. The heart in her hands pulsed once more, as if in response to her touch, and as her fingers brushed the door's surface, the symbols on it began to glow brightly. The door groaned, its ancient hinges creaking as it slowly began to open. As the door parted, a flood of light poured out, and Amara stepped through, ready to face whatever awaited her on the other side. The light that poured through the door was unlike any Amara had ever seen. It was not the cold, harsh glow of a distant sun, nor the warm, comforting light of home. It was an ethereal, almost otherworldly radiance, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and bend, as if the very essence of the place defied the rules of light and space. Amara stepped through the threshold, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. The moment her foot crossed into the light, the door behind her slammed shut with a force that echoed through the cavern, sealing her fate. The room before her was vast, stretching out in every direction like an endless hall of mirrors. Each wall seemed to reflect her image, but the reflections were distorted, twisted, as though they were not truly her own. She could see herself, but she saw herself as she might have been, or as she could be, or perhaps as she feared she was becoming. Faces she had never seen before flickered in the mirrors, and in the distance, the faint sound of whispers filled the air. But at the center of the room stood something that drew her attention more than the shifting reflections, a massive pedestal. Gleaming in the center of the room, bathed in the soft, pulsing light. Upon the pedestal rested a small, unassuming object. It was a stone, much like the heart, though it was darker, its surface rougher and more jagged. It was smaller than the heart, but the energy that radiated from it was just as potent, if not more so. Amara's gaze was drawn to it as though an invisible force were pulling her toward it. The serpent's voice, now a comforting murmur in her mind, urged her forward. That is the key, the serpent whispered. The key to your true power. The heart has awakened your potential, but the stone will unlock your purpose. She moved toward the pedestal, her steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing in the silence of the chamber. As she drew closer, the reflections in the mirrors seemed to shift again, this time more violently, as though the very act of her approaching the pedestal had disturbed something deep within the fabric of reality. The faces in the mirrors became more pronounced, their eyes wide, their expressions filled with longing and desperation, as if they were reaching out to her for help, or perhaps warning her to turn back. But Amara did not falter. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. The whispers from the mirrors grew louder, becoming a chorus of voices, all calling her name in unison, Amara. 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 She reached the pedestal, her fingers trembling as she extended her hand toward the stone. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, a flash of blinding light filling her vision. The force was almost too much to bear, and for a moment, she thought she might be consumed by it. But then, the energy settled, and the light faded, leaving her standing in a new reality. The mirrors were gone. The pedestal was gone. The cavern, the door, the darkness, everything had vanished, leaving her standing in a vast, open space. There were no walls, no ceiling, just an endless horizon stretching out before her. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like a meadow, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. The sky above was the color of dusk, a deep violet that faded into the softest shades of pink and orange. In the distance, she saw him. The man from her dreams, the one whose face had haunted her thoughts for so long. His features were still vague, but she could see his eyes clearly now, eyes that were the color of starlight, full of mystery and knowing. His presence was comforting yet unsettling, as if he were both a part of her and a stranger at the same time. He was waiting for her, standing in the center of this strange, dreamlike world, his arms outstretched as though inviting her forward. Amara's heart quickened, and she began to walk toward him. Her steps were light, effortless, as though the very ground beneath her feet had become a part of her, guiding her toward her destiny. As she drew closer, the man's features sharpened, becoming clearer and more distinct. His hair was long, silver like moonlight, and his face was ageless, neither young nor old, but somehow timeless. He wore a cloak that shimmered with the same light as the stone in her hand, as though he were a part of the very fabric of this place. When she reached him, he spoke, his voice soft but filled with a weight that seemed to echo through the vastness of the world around them. "You have come far, Amara," he said. "And now you stand at the threshold of your true power." Amara looked at him, confusion and curiosity mixing in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and for the first time, she felt as though she were seeing him for who he truly was, not just in her dreams, but in reality. He was a part of her, a reflection of something deeper, something she had always known but had never fully understood. "I am the keeper of the forgotten dreams," he said. "And you, Amara, are the one who will awaken them." His words seemed to resonate within her, deep in her soul. The stone in her hand pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, as though it were alive, syncing with her heartbeat. "The heart has awakened you," he continued. "But the stone will guide you to your purpose. You must face what you have forgotten, what you have hidden away. before you can truly claim your place in this world." Amara nodded, the weight of his words settling upon her like a cloak. She had come so far, and yet, there was still so much she did not understand. But for the first time, she felt as though the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The man reached out, his hand gentle as it rested on her shoulder. "The journey is not over, Amara. You have only just begun," and with those words, the world around her began to shift once more. The horizon blurred, the sky darkening as the stars began to emerge, filling the space with a quiet, infinite beauty. The man faded into the night, his form dissolving into the very fabric of the world. Amara stood alone, but she no longer felt lost. The heart and the stone were within her, and with them, she knew her journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Amara stood at the center of the vast, open expanse, her thoughts swirling in the quiet, infinite night. The stars above twinkled like distant promises, and the soft glow of the stone in her hand cast long shadows across the ground, illuminating the path ahead. The man, the keeper of the forgotten dreams, had vanished, leaving only the echo of his words lingering in the air. She had come far, yes, but what lay ahead seemed as uncertain and mysterious as the night sky above. The warmth of the stone in her hand was comforting, a steady pulse of energy that matched the rhythm of her heart. But she could still feel the weight of her task, the weight of the forgotten dreams that she was now bound to awaken. What had he meant when he said she would awaken them? And what was the true purpose of the stone? The heart had already begun her transformation, had already opened her eyes to powers she had never known. But now, with the stone, she felt a deeper connection, a link to something greater, something ancient and profound. As she looked out across the horizon, she saw the faintest shimmer in the distance, something that flickered and shifted, as though the world itself were bending and reshaping. Her instincts told her that this was where she needed to go, that this shimmering light held the answers she sought. Without thinking, she began to walk, her steps sure and steady, the soft ground beneath her feet giving way to a path that seemed to form as she moved forward. The air was thick with a quiet energy, and with each step, the stars above seemed to grow brighter, more intense. The sky began to ripple, as though it were a vast, living canvas being painted in real time. Amara couldn't help but be drawn into the beauty of it, her gaze lifting to take in the endless expanse of light and color. There was something mesmerizing about the way the stars moved, something alive in the shifting constellations, as though they were alive and watching her, guiding her steps. As she neared the shimmering light, she could hear faint whispers, voices carried on the wind. They were soft at first, like a distant murmur, but as she got closer, they became clearer, more distinct. "Amara." The whisper came from all directions, its tone both gentle and insistent. "Amara," she stopped in her tracks, her heart leaping in her chest. The voice was unmistakable, the same voice she had heard in the cavern, the same voice that had guided her this far. But this time, it wasn't just the serpent speaking. This voice carried something else with it, a deeper resonance, as though it were the voice of the world itself. "You are here," the voice continued, each word falling like a soft raindrop in the quiet of the night. "You are here to find what has been lost, what has been forgotten. You are here to remember." Amara's breath caught in her throat. The air seemed to shimmer around her as if reality itself were beginning to bend and shift. The shimmering light ahead of her intensified, and as she stepped closer, the space before her seemed to open, revealing a vast, ethereal landscape that stretched out in all directions. It was like nothing she had ever seen, a world both familiar and foreign, a place caught between dreams and waking life. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like the meadow she had left behind, but here, the flowers were different, strange, glowing blossoms that pulsed with light, their petals shifting in color as though they were alive. In the distance, a gentle river flowed, its surface shimmering with a pale, silvery glow. The air smelled sweet, like jasmine and lavender, and the warmth of the light around her was soothing, like a dream that wrapped her in its embrace. But it was not the beauty of the place that struck her most. It was the feeling, the overwhelming sense of déjà vu, the feeling that she had been here before, or that she was always meant to be here. Every step she took felt like a journey into her past, a journey to a place she had once known but had forgotten. As she continued forward, she saw something in the distance, an archway, tall and grand, made of ancient stone. It stood at the end of a path lined with the glowing flowers, and its surface was covered in the same intricate symbols that had adorned the cavern. The stone was dark, almost black, but it shimmered with a faint, ethereal light. It called to her, its presence both comforting and intimidating. "That is the gateway," the voice whispered once again. "The doorway to what you seek. The door to your past, to the dreams you have forgotten." Amara felt a pull toward the archway, as if it were magnetized to her very being. She moved forward, her footsteps light, her heart steady but filled with anticipation. The closer she got to the archway, the more the air seemed to hum with energy, the light around her becoming more intense, more focused. The stone of the archway seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, as though it were waiting for her to step through. When she reached the archway, she hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Beyond the archway, she could see nothing but darkness, darkness that seemed to stretch into eternity. But she knew, deep down, that beyond that darkness lay the answers she sought, the key to unlocking the mysteries of her past, the key to awakening the forgotten dreams. She took a deep breath and stepped through the archway. Immediately, the world around her changed. The landscape dissolved, the flowers and the river fading into nothingness. She was plunged into a darkness so complete that she could no longer see her own hands in front of her. The silence was deafening, oppressive. As though the world itself had been swallowed whole by this inky void. But then, a single point of light appeared before her, a flicker in the darkness. It grew larger, brighter, until it filled the space with a soft, gentle glow. The light shifted, revealing the outline of a figure, a person standing before her, bathed in the warmth of the light. Amara took a step forward, her heart pounding. The figure remained still, its form indistinct but familiar. As she drew closer, the figure turned to face her, and she saw his eyes, those starry, knowing eyes. The man, but this time, he was different. This time, he was not just a shadow in her dreams. This time, he was real, welcome. "Amara," the figure said, his voice calm and deep, like the sound of distant thunder. "You have come to reclaim what was lost. To find what was forgotten. And now, you must remember." Amara stood before the figure, her breath shallow, the air heavy with anticipation. The man's presence was like a force in itself, both overwhelming and comforting, as though he were the center of everything and yet separate from it all. His eyes, those starry, infinite eyes, bore into hers, filled with a depth that seemed to transcend time and space. They were eyes that knew everything and nothing, eyes that held the answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet. His voice, when it came, was soft but firm, echoing through the vast emptiness around them. "You have come far, Amara," he said, his words carrying a weight that pressed against her chest, as though they were the culmination of a lifetime of memories waiting to be unlocked. "But now, you must remember who you are. Only then can you awaken the forgotten dreams." The words resonated deep within her, stirring something ancient inside her, a memory long buried beneath the layers of time. She felt the pull of the past, the shadow of something lost, and yet, she could not grasp it. It was there, just out of reach, like a whisper in the dark. "Who am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. His gaze never wavered, never faltered, as though he could see straight through her, into the very core of her being. "You are the key, Amara," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 forgotten lives. "You are the bridge between the past and the future. You are the one who will unlock the memories of those who came before you, and through that, you will awaken the dreams that have been lost." Amara's heart quickened, her mind swirling with confusion and curiosity. The words were so heavy, so full of meaning, but she couldn't quite understand them. What did he mean by the key? What was this bridge between the past and the future? And what were these forgotten dreams? The man seemed to sense her inner turmoil, for he reached out, his hand gentle as it rested upon her shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding, and Amara felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, as though he were pulling her out of the storm within her mind. "Look," he said simply, his gaze directed toward the darkness around them. Amara turned, following his gaze, and as she did, the darkness began to shift. The inky void before her rippled like water, its surface breaking apart, revealing glimpses of images, flickers of memory, like fragments of a dream she couldn't quite grasp. Faces, places, and moments in time passed before her, each one brief but vivid, like flashes of lightning across a stormy sky. She saw a child, a younger version of herself, standing in a field, her hands reaching toward the sky, her face full of wonder. She saw a woman, her mother perhaps, her face filled with sorrow and longing, her eyes looking out over a distant horizon. She saw a man, a stranger, his features obscured but his presence undeniable, standing by the edge of a great sea, as though waiting for something or someone. The images faded as quickly as they had appeared, but they left a lingering sense of recognition within her. These were not just random visions. They were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a story that she had forgotten, pieces of her own past that she had locked away, buried under the weight of time. "Do you see?" The man's voice interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. "These are your memories. These are the forgotten dreams." Amara nodded slowly, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "But why have I forgotten them?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. The man's expression softened, and for a moment, he seemed almost sad. His eyes, once filled with the light of 1,000 stars, now seemed to carry the weight of centuries of loss. the dreams were lost when the heart was fractured, he said. When the world was torn apart, the memories of those who lived before were erased, scattered across time. But you, Amara, you are the one who can bring them back. You are the one who can heal the fracture and restore what was lost. Amara felt a pang of sorrow deep in her chest. The weight of the world seemed to press against her, the burden of responsibility heavier than she had ever imagined. She had always known that she was different, that there was something about her that set her apart, but this was something far beyond what she had ever envisioned. How do I restore them? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, the question trembling on the edge of fear. The man's gaze softened, his smile gentle. The heart and the stone are the keys, he said. Together, they hold the power to unlock the dreams, to heal the fracture. But you must first face the darkness within yourself. Only then can you awaken the forgotten dreams and restore balance to the world. Amara felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of the darkness within herself. What darkness? What part of her had been buried so deep that it had remained hidden from her for so long? What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, his presence enveloping her like a warm embrace. You are not just the key to the dreams, Amara, he said softly. You are also the keeper of the shadows. The darkness that you fear is not something external, not something that can be defeated. It is a part of you. You must accept it, face it, and make peace with it. Only then will you be able to unlock the dreams and restore what has been lost. Amara's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words sank in. She had always run from the darkness, from the parts of herself she didn't understand. She had buried them deep within her, locked them away, afraid that if she looked too closely, she would be consumed by them. But now, in this strange, dreamlike world, she realized that she could no longer hide. The darkness was a part of her, and it was time to face it. The man stepped back, his form beginning to dissolve into the light. Remember, Amara, he said softly, his voice a mere echo. The darkness is not your enemy. It is your guide. Embrace it, and the dreams will awaken. And with those final words, he was gone. Amara stood alone once more, the vast expanse stretching out before her. The air was still, the sky filled with stars. But she felt different, as though something within her had shifted. The darkness was no longer something to fear. It was a part of her, and she would face it, whatever it was, head on. The forgotten dreams were waiting to be awakened. The silence that enveloped Amara after the man's departure felt more profound than before. The world around her, this strange, ethereal place, was still and unyielding. Yet within her, something stirred. The weight of the words she had just heard, the truth about the darkness within her, felt as if it were settling into her bones, planting roots deep into her soul. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing the path she needed to walk, though the path was not clear, not easy. For a long moment, she stood there, breathing slowly, her hands clasped tightly around the stone. The faint, pulsing warmth of the stone seemed to echo her heartbeat, grounding her, reminding her of the task at hand. She had to face the darkness within herself. She had to embrace it, not as an enemy, but as a guide, as the keeper of secrets she had long denied. Her mind wandered back to the shimmering visions of the past, the flashes of memories she had seen in the darkness. The child in the field. Her mother's sorrowful eyes. The stranger by the sea. Each of these glimpses had been like a brushstroke in a larger picture, one she couldn't yet fully understand. But the fragments were starting to make sense. They were part of her, part of a story she had long forgotten. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The cool air filled her lungs, and for the first time since she had arrived in this strange place, she felt a connection to something beyond herself, something ancient, something timeless. The forgotten dreams, the past, the memories, everything was tied together, waiting for her to uncover it. But first, she had to face the truth. With a sense of determination, she began to walk again, her feet light upon the ground, her steps carrying her forward. The darkness she had once feared no longer seemed so overwhelming. It was simply a part of the landscape, a shadow that existed in tandem with the light. As she moved through the void, the space around her began to shift, the edges blurring and reshaping. Like a dream in flux, she walked for what felt like hours, the stillness around her both comforting and disorienting. The ground beneath her feet was soft, almost like sand, but it seemed to stretch endlessly, without end. The only sound was the steady rhythm of her own breath. Filling the silence with a pulse of life, then, just as she was beginning to wonder if she would ever reach her destination, the darkness began to break apart. A crack formed in the air before her, a thin line of light splitting the blackness like the first rays of dawn. Slowly, the crack widened, revealing a new landscape beyond it, one that was both familiar and foreign, a place that felt like home yet distant. Amara stepped through the crack in the darkness, her heart racing in her chest. As she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted once more. She found herself standing in the middle of a vast, open space, a meadow, bathed in the soft glow of a pale moon. The air here was different. Fresh and clean, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. The grass beneath her feet was soft, lush, and swayed gently in the breeze, but what caught her attention was the figure standing in the distance, a woman, draped in a flowing gown of silver light, her long hair shimmering like stardust. She stood motionless, her back to Amara, as though waiting for her to approach. There was something about her, something that felt both comforting and unsettling, as though she were both a guide and a mystery. Amara's steps were cautious as she approached the woman. Her heart thudded in her chest, her mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? And what did she have to do with the forgotten dreams? As she drew closer, the woman turned, and Amara felt the breath catch in her throat. The woman's face was familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. She had the same eyes as Amara, eyes that shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, eyes that seemed to hold secrets long buried. The woman smiled, and her voice, when she spoke, was soft and gentle, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "I have been waiting for you," she said, her voice carrying a sense of quiet authority, yet tinged with warmth. "You have come far, Amara. But the journey is not over." Amara stood still for a moment, her breath coming in short gasps. There was something about this woman that felt both strange and familiar. As though she had always been here, just out of reach, like a memory that teases the edge of consciousness but never fully reveals itself. "Who are you?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "And why do I feel like I know you?" The woman's smile deepened, but there was a sadness in her eyes, as if she had seen the same question asked countless times before, but never answered. "I am the keeper of forgotten dreams," the woman said simply, her voice steady. "I am the one who has watched over the dreams that were lost. I have waited for you, Amara, because you are the one who will awaken them." Amara felt a chill run through her at the mention of the keeper. This was the role she had been destined to play, the one who would restore what had been forgotten, what had been lost to time. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her, but something in the woman's gaze, something in her presence, told Amara that she was not alone in this. "But I don't understand," Amara said, her voice trembling. "What are these forgotten dreams? Why were they lost in the first place?" The keeper of forgotten dreams stepped forward, her movements fluid, graceful, as though she were part of the very air around them. She reached out, her hand brushing gently against Amara's, and in that touch, Amara felt a surge of energy, a connection that went beyond words. "The forgotten dreams are the memories of those who came before you," the keeper explained, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "They are the stories of the world, the whispers of lives lived long ago. They were lost when the heart was fractured, when the world was torn apart. But you, Amara, you are the key to their return." Amara felt her heart race. The weight of the task before her had never seemed so real, so urgent. She had always known that she was different, but now the truth was clear: she had been chosen. She had been chosen to restore the forgotten dreams, to heal the rift between the past and the present. The keeper's gaze softened, her eyes filled with something like sorrow. "You must face the darkness within," she said softly. "Only then can you awaken the dreams. Only then can you restore what has been lost." Amara nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle deep within her. She had known, on some level, that this was the moment she had been waiting for. It was time to face the shadows within herself, the darkness she had feared for so long. And only by embracing it could she hope to awaken the forgotten dreams and restore balance to the world. Amara stood in the moonlit meadow, her heart heavy with the weight of the keeper's words. The darkness within her, the part of herself that she had spent so long hiding from, was now the key to restoring the forgotten dreams. The realization seemed impossible to comprehend, but the more she thought about it, the more it began to make sense. The darkness was not an enemy to defeat, it was a part of her, a shadow that had been cast but could also be embraced. The keeper's eyes lingered on her, watching her closely, as if waiting for her to process what she had been told. The air was still, and the soft rustle of the grass was the only sound that filled the silence between them. Amara's breath was shallow, her mind swirling with questions and uncertainty. How could she face this darkness? How could she accept something so inherently terrifying? "What must I do?" Amara finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't know if she was ready, if she could face the fear that had always lurked within her. But the sense of purpose that had begun to grow within her told her that she had no choice. This was her destiny, her responsibility. She could not turn away from it. The keeper stepped closer, her presence as serene as the moonlight that bathed the meadow. "You must go deeper within yourself, Amara," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You must look into the shadows of your own soul. Only by facing your darkest fears will you unlock the memories of the past." Amara nodded slowly, though a wave of uncertainty washed over her. She had never been able to look at the shadows within her. They were things she had buried long ago, painful memories she had tried to forget. But now, they called to her. Not as a threat but as a guide, showing her the path she needed to follow. But how do I face it? Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly. How do I find what I've hidden from myself for so long? The keeper smiled gently, her expression filled with understanding. You must trust yourself, Amara. The shadows are not as frightening as they seem. They are the reflections of your fears, your regrets, your pain. But they are also the reflections of your strength, your courage, and your resilience. They are a part of you, and only by embracing them can you awaken the dreams that have been lost. Amara closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. The wind in the meadow stirred the tall grass, and the cool night air seemed to carry a sense of peace. She knew that the keeper was right. The fear she had felt for so long was not an enemy to be vanquished, but an integral part of her. The shadows were not evil, they were just pieces of her soul that she had neglected, forgotten, or feared. The journey within herself would not be easy, but it was necessary. If she was to restore the forgotten dreams, she had to face her own darkness, accept it, and learn to live with it. Opening her eyes, she looked back at the keeper, her gaze now filled with resolve. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though it held a quiet strength she had not known she possessed. The keeper nodded, her eyes warm with approval. Then go, Amara. The darkness is waiting for you, but it will not consume you. It will guide you. Trust yourself, and you will find what you seek. Without another word, the keeper stepped back, her figure fading into the mist that surrounded them. The meadow, the moonlight, and the soft rustle of the grass began to blur, shifting like a mirage, as though the entire world was waiting for Amara to take the next step. She could feel the pull of the darkness, calling to her from deep within her soul. Taking a deep breath, Amara closed her eyes again, this time surrendering to the pull. She let go of her fear and allowed herself to fall inward, deep into the recesses of her mind. The darkness was not something to be fought, but something to be understood. She was no longer running from it, she was walking toward it, embracing it as a part of herself. The world around her began to shift and change, and the meadow faded from view. She was no longer standing in the soft grass, she was now standing in a vast, empty void, a place where there was nothing but the stillness of her thoughts. The silence was deafening, but it was a silence that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. She was alone, but not entirely. She could feel the presence of something, an energy, a force, moving just beyond the edges of her awareness. It was the darkness, the part of her that had been waiting patiently all these years. A part of her that had never truly gone away. It was not a void to fear, but a space to explore. I'm here, she whispered to herself, her voice breaking the silence. I'm ready to face you. A cold breeze stirred the air, and the darkness around her seemed to shift, pulling her deeper into itself. Amara didn't fight it. She let herself be pulled, sinking further into the void, her heart racing but her mind calm. She could feel her fear rising. This was the moment she had been avoiding for so long. But she could also feel something else, something warm, something ancient and wise. The darkness was not hostile. It was not a place of destruction. It was a part of her that had been waiting to be heard, to be understood. As she moved deeper, she began to see flashes, images of her past. Faces, moments, emotions long buried. Each image was like a key unlocking a door to another piece of her soul, another forgotten dream. The first image was of her as a child, sitting by a window, staring out at the world with wonder in her eyes. There was a sense of longing, of wanting to belong, to find her place in the world. The second image showed her as a teenager, standing on the edge of a cliff, her heart heavy with unspoken words, her gaze distant and lost. The images continued, each one revealing a piece of her past that she had never fully understood. Her fears, her dreams, her desires, they were all here. In the darkness, waiting to be acknowledged. With each step she took, the images grew clearer, the fragments of her past falling into place like pieces of a puzzle, and then, as the darkness seemed to envelope her completely, a final image appeared before her, one that took her breath away. It was of a young woman standing at the edge of a great ocean, the wind in her hair, her eyes filled with both sadness and hope. The woman's face was familiar, yet different, as though it was a reflection of Amara herself. In that moment, Amara understood. The woman in the image was her, but it was also the past, the dreams, the lost memories. She was both the one who had forgotten and the one who was now awakening the dreams that had been lost for so long. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her own soul shift within her. The darkness was not a place to be feared, but a place to be understood. And now, she was ready to restore what had been forgotten. Amara stood in the depths of the darkness, her mind swirling with the revelations that had just unfurled. The image of the woman by the ocean, so much like herself, had imprinted itself upon her soul. She was staring at the forgotten parts of herself, not as fragments to be mourned, but as pieces of a whole that she could now reclaim. The forgotten dreams weren't just about the past, they were about understanding who she had been, who she was, and who she was becoming. The emptiness around her seemed to stretch on forever. But within the void, she could feel the presence of something ancient, something familiar. It wasn't an overwhelming presence, but one that quietly echoed through her soul, resonating with the deepest parts of her being. The darkness that had once been so frightening now felt like an old friend, patiently waiting for her to discover the truth hidden within it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Each breath she took seemed to deepen her connection to this place, this inner world she had kept locked away for so long. Her eyes closed, and as she did, the world around her began to shift once more. She found herself standing in a vast, open expanse. The landscape was strange, unlike any place she had seen before. The sky above was dark, but it shimmered with stars, as if the night was alive, pulsing with energy. The ground beneath her feet was soft and yet firm, like the earth had grown from the roots of forgotten trees. Around her, the wind whispered softly, like the breath of ancient spirits, carrying with it the scent of the sea and something else, something elusive. And then, there it was, a towering structure stood in the distance, its form indistinct yet impossibly tall, stretching high into the sky. It was made of something ancient, something that felt timeless, like it had always been there, waiting. The structure seemed to glow with an ethereal light. Not from any source she could see, but as though it were the light itself, a light born from the shadows. Amara's heart raced. She felt the pull of it, like a call from the depths of her being. She knew she had to go to it, to discover what it held, what it was that had drawn her here. Her feet moved of their own accord, her body compelled toward the structure, as though it were the answer to all the questions that had been swirling in her mind. As she drew closer, the structure became clearer. It was like a tower, though not one built by human hands. It seemed to grow organically, its surface shifting and changing like liquid stone, rippling with light and darkness in a delicate balance. The closer she got, the more it seemed to pulse with life, as though it were breathing, alive in a way that was beyond comprehension. Reaching the base of the tower, Amara hesitated for a moment. Her hand reached out instinctively, and as her fingers brushed against the surface of the tower, she felt a jolt of energy shoot through her, filling her with warmth, with understanding. The stone, if it could be called that, seemed to respond to her touch, like it recognized her, like it had been waiting for her to come home. She stepped forward, and the structure seemed to shift, opening up before her. A passageway, narrow but clear, appeared in the wall, leading her inside. The air inside was different, thicker, richer, as though it were infused with memories long forgotten. It felt as though she was walking through the corridors of time itself, each step echoing with the weight of ages. Amara walked through the passageway, her heart racing with anticipation. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew she had to see it, had to uncover whatever lay hidden within. The darkness was no longer something to fear, it was a doorway to knowledge, to understanding. At the end of the passage, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, and what she saw took her breath away. The chamber was filled with hundreds, thousands, of shimmering orbs, each one floating serenely in the air. They were like bubbles of light, glowing softly with an inner radiance, and each orb was different. Some were small, others were large, and some seemed to pulse with a rhythm that mirrored her own heartbeat. The orbs were beautiful, ethereal, and yet they carried a weight that Amara couldn't quite grasp. She stepped forward, drawn to one of the orbs. As she approached, the orb flickered and glowed brighter, as though it were reacting to her presence. Hesitant but compelled, she reached out and touched it. The moment her fingers made contact, the orb shimmered and expanded, and in a flash, Amara was pulled into it. Her body was weightless, and the world around her dissolved into light. In that instant, she was no longer standing in the chamber, but instead, she was hurtling through space, through time. The darkness and the light merged together, creating an endless spiral of visions, memories, and emotions. She was no longer herself, she was everyone and everything. She saw herself as a child, her eyes wide with wonder as she explored the world around her. She saw her mother, her face filled with sorrow, holding her close as though trying to protect her from the inevitable. She saw a man, a stranger, standing on the edge of a cliff, his eyes filled with secrets and promises unspoken. She saw flashes of the past, pieces of forgotten dreams that had once been hers, that had once belonged to the world, but then, the vision shifted. She saw herself again, older, standing at the edge of the ocean. The sea stretched before her, vast and endless, and she could feel the salt of the water on her skin, the pull of the waves on her heart. She was no longer just a witness, she was part of the story, part of the dream that had been forgotten. The orb seemed to show her the truth, about herself, about the world, about everything that had been lost and forgotten. The darkness within her was not a barrier, but a guide, leading her through the fragmented memories of the past, unlocking the pieces of the dream that had been broken, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision stopped. Amara found herself back in the chamber, her hand still resting on the orb. The other orbs around her had faded, leaving only the faint glow of the one she had touched. The weight of the knowledge, of the dream she had uncovered, settled upon her. She was no longer the person who had arrived in this place, unsure and fearful. She was someone different, someone whole. She had faced the darkness within herself and embraced it, and in doing so, she had awakened the forgotten dreams. As the light of the orb dimmed, the passageway behind her opened once again. The way forward was clear now, but Amara knew that the journey was far from over. There was still much to discover, many more pieces to gather, but she was ready. She was ready to bring the forgotten dreams back into the light.